Hi, welcome to the archives. So, in this episode, it is called SK and Raven. I wasn't going to do a blog on these two, like at all, but here we are. Always jumping on the bandwagon. So, before I start, I wanted to flag that I study shame, okay? Before you come for me. I study shame, so this blog is coming from a perspective where I'm considering the role of shame and what it did to these two. I'm interested in how shame moved them away from one another. All of this is a lot of my own personal experiences too, so take it with a grain of salt. Like, who cares what I or any other people have to say about the topic? Only they know for sure what happened between them, right? So I'm using this more as a teachable moment to share to share about the emotions of shame. And I also want you to know that this is more education. No, this is more entertainment than educational. But this is where I'm coming from. So others will speak on it. I'm coming more from a shame research perspective. So from my personal experience and from watching SK and Raven, their storyline on Love is Blind, I absolutely think I was drinking turmeric tea. So if my tongue is yellow, that's why. You probably wouldn't have noticed if I didn't say that. Whatever. Okay, so from my personal experience from watching SK and Raven on Love is Blind, I absolutely think that it's intentional that a lot of men like SK will lead women on or will drag them in a relationship that they know is not viable. They know it's not going to work, but they will go along with it anyways, in part to humiliate their partner because they feel an initial humiliation from their partner at first, or so they perceive, right? And so I also haven't watched the last part of the show. I wanted to make that clear. I haven't seen the altar scene. I don't have access to Netflix at the moment, and so I haven't watched it. But from what I saw, at least in the initial beginnings, it was very evident, like it was clear that Raven wasn't really into SK at first. I mean, to me, that was as clear as day. Like, she was not really feeling him. They had no chemistry. She didn't touch him for how long? She did not touch him for a very long time. For whatever reasons, right? This is not necessarily to say she wasn't attracted to him, but she did say herself that there was a physical thing. She was one of the couples that physically couldn't get into it the same way as other couples were. I think they were the only couple out of everybody who on the first night they weren't intimate, they didn't touch, they didn't have sex, they didn't do any of that. And that could be for a lot of different reasons, but to me it was very clear that Raven was not feeling SK. It was a situation where if they did get together, they both were settling. That's what was clear to me. I was shocked that they survived the honeymoon retreat phase. I didn't think they would last because it was painful to watch, at least for me. She made him at times look like a damn fool. Like, she was not feeling him. And what came to mind, at least for me, was like the idea of like the dark skin guy just being rejected by the light skinned girl. I know the story well. There are brothers in my life who stay chasing white women, who are always chasing light skinned women, and only to be met with unrequited love. Like, I've seen that happen to people. I've been like that emotional support for that dark skinned brother who was trying so hard to get the attention of typically a white woman or a light skinned woman, and it's a pick me version of men. I think it's a pick-me version of men, especially for dark-skinned men. Those are the ones who are they're not used to being chosen. It's even worse if they were nerds growing up, or if they were rejected as kids, or they were rejected as youth. It's kind of like the incel type. They vengeful when women don't check for them. I'm not saying that this is SK. He actually seems to get women. We've seen a couple of different women coming out recently saying that he was with them. So it's not like he doesn't get women. He's not chosen. He might even be a player, it seems, right? But what I'm talking about is the type of guys who, from an early age, they were used to being rejected or overlooked. And so it breeds this sort of insecurities within them. And then they, in turn, are really not addicted, well, maybe addicted, but they're attracted to, like, getting the baddest, right? You know the type, like what would be considered the baddest in mainstream white women. light-skinned women, pretty girls, thin women, slim, thick. The Women King, I did an episode on that. Bad bitches, boss bitches, the it girls. Those are the ones who other men want to have, the ones that other men can't have, the ones that are out of their league, who love to chase, who they love to chase because it gives them a thrill. The ones who are thought to make them look more powerful, to make them look more big. Insert whatever name for these labeled, like however you label these women and girls, right? They're the ones that are seen as desirable. They're the ones that are seen as worthy. They're the ones that are seen as pretty, like blah, blah, blah. You know the type. So from my understanding, sometimes in these cases, these men need to get with these types of women to overcompensate, right? It's psychology, or at least in mine, it's psychology. It's better math for them. It makes sense to get the quote unquote high value woman, right? So if you have this internal dialogue that says, I see myself as a deficit, society sees me and men who look like me as undesirable, especially if you're a dark-skinned brother. Dark-skinned people globally are just seen as less desirable. Whether that's true or not, that's not what I'm arguing. I'm talking specifically about how white mainstream media, the hierarchy of desirability, right? The darker you are, the less desirable, the less pretty, the less gorgeous, attractive you are seen. And so if you had this internal thought, then sometimes, maybe not naturally, but programming will say that I need someone who is better, more desirable than I am to kind of even and balance out the playing field, right? I imagine this is a conversation some men have with themselves, though they would never ever admit that this is true. I think SK would agree that he's a darker skinned man. He's African. He's Nigerian. He's Yoruba. He has an accent. He's an immigrant. He's shorter than most men. These are things that are not read by society as conventionally or traditionally attractive when it comes to men. He's not white. He's not light skinned. He's not super tall. He seems more introverted, quiet, kind, emotional. He's kind of awkward. One of the comments said that he was boring. He's in touch with his emotions. One more thing, I don't actually think a lot of these men are actually in touch with their emotions. I think that's how they're perceived, or that's a persona they want to perceive. I actually don't think they're necessarily in touch with their emotions per se. They might come off as more emotional, but not, I don't think they have any more or less emotional intelligence. Although there is some level of emotional intelligence if you know how to manipulate people emotionally as well too. So that's a really complicated conversation. I just wanted to add that there. Right? Typically we see those kinds of men as like soft or weak. He's not the stereotypically angry, aggressive, like gangster, athlete, suave, smooth actor type that is deemed acceptable for stereotypical black masculinity. So as an African woman who falls under a similar category, but on the other side of the gender spectrum, right, I'm seen as like awkward, like fat, short, not thin, darker skin, loud. Like these are not things that are traditionally seen as quote unquote attractive. So I'm on the other side of, I'm African. I don't necessarily have an accent, but I am an immigrant. That's not really seen by society as like super conventionally attractive, right? So I can tell you that being seen in that way by the rest of the world, that does come with some level of shame. Even if we aren't ashamed of ourselves per se, it still comes with some level of shame, whether it's shame that's projected onto us, shame that gets internalized. Shame circulates around these kinds of conversations, right? It enters the room, whether we want to or not, whether it's just the way in which who and how we are seen by others is associated with things that, and the messages that say we should be ashamed of ourselves. This is in the scholarly literature, so I'm not making it up. Visit a few of my blogs. I did a few blogs recently on the history of shame that talks about this, but there are certain people that the mainstream white media has associated with shame. We are sold the message that black people in general are shameful or should be ashamed of themselves. Never mind if you're a continental African, which comes with its own added layer, right? Because we see Africans as like connected with like poverty, hunger, scarcity, lack, incompetence, animism, nakedness. We're like swinging from vines on trees. We are wearing loincloths, you know, like the idea that the Africans have like these flies swarming our swollen, malnourished bodies. those are all indicators that reasons why we should be ashamed of ourselves, right? So God forbid, if you're a dark-skinned woman or man, if you're trans, if you're disabled, if you're fat, if you're queer, if you're a lesbian, if you're autistic, if you don't ascribe to gender, all of these different markers, all of these different ways of being and knowing, moving through the world, they are automatically assumed to be associated with shame. And this gets ingrained. These are the messages that get ingrained. Sometimes we take them on ourselves. Globally, you can go anywhere in the world. A majority of people will know and they understand the social scripts around who is shameful and who is not shameful. It's common, it's well known, it's colonial, it's sexist, it's racist, it's vile. Fight me, argue me on that. We know you have an idea of who is beautiful. When you think of beauty, you have a very specific idea of who you think is beautiful. When you think of ugly, you have a very specific idea of who you think is ugly, right? So whether we internalize it or not, these objects of shame, they circulate around us. Sometimes it seeps into us, in our psyches, our muscles, and our bones. And I say that because shame specifically is a very physical emotion. It is physically painful. It's not just like this thing you feel, it is this thing you feel in your body, right? You feel your muscles tighten. You feel anxiety. You start sweating. You start blushing. Shame is a very physical emotion. It's kind of like a bad chemical that blocks our soul. It gets in our bodies and it blocks our solar plexus. It attacks our gut. It threatens our self-worth, right? Solar plexus is known for like confidence. It really just gets to that area. Shame gets directed to us. It gets projected onto us, which then accumulates on stress in our lives, which is already wreaking so much havoc, especially right now with the pandemic going on. There's just a lot, right? So oftentimes we won't even recognize that we have shame around us. We won't recognize that we might feel shame at times. We won't recognize that we're participating in who we think should be seen as shameful. But at some point, we find ourselves caught in this very anti-Black rhetoric, right? We start to believe that we're not enough. We start to believe that others are more desirable than we are. We start to think that aligning ourselves with certain people will get us more liked or be more popular simply because, and obviously not exclusively due to this, but one of the reasons is this myth that shapes and informs the outcomes of our lives, right? Because others have decided for us that we are less than other humans. The reality is, like women, some men, especially dark-skinned Black men, they do receive these negative messages about who and what they are, and that does lead to low self-esteem. It does lead to self-hatred. They do believe they're not enough, right? Most would never say this out loud, and they would never admit it. Instead, what ends up happening is they see the self-hate in women, right? Especially if you're a misogynist or misogynoir, then like rather than seeing your own self-hate, you see it in other women, right? They can't see it in themselves. They absolutely refuse to see low self-esteem in them. They are confident, they're big, I'm not ashamed of who I am. You're ashamed of who you are. You have low self-esteem. You have low self-worth. Projection, projection, projection. They need to see it in others, and they need to be loud about it in others, especially women. They need to be loud about other people having self-hate, other people having low self-esteem, because it minimizes it within themselves. It makes them feel less bad about having it within themselves, right? If I'm allowed about it within you, it distracts me from having to see and reckon it within myself. This overcompensation, this hyper superiority that masks the inferior complex. Let's do this again. This overcompensation, this hyper superiority that masks an inferiority complex, is why some men will go and seek out like the white or the light-skinned women, right? Because there's an inferiority complex that says I feel small, I think I'm small, I recognize that the world sees me as small. What do I have to do to be seen as big? Oh, those are the girls that got value. Those are the ones I gotta go for. I wanted to know one more quick thing is that these dynamics also First of all, obviously not all men. Before the all men crew were like, not all men, not all black, dark skinned men. Obviously. Secondly, this also happens across all demographics. This is not just something that we struggle with within the black community. Within the white community, I'm sure there are white men who know that, like, getting with that thin, tall, blonde hair woman gets them more currency. Men use women, period, across all boards. Same with, I'm sure, in like Indian brown communities, men know that the desirable woman is a fair skinned woman, tall, thin. It's not just within the black community, it's within all communities. Men know that getting with certain women gets them elevated in society, period. I'm not checking for like the short, fat, black, dark skinned woman, because to get with that short, fat, black, dark skinned woman is gonna bring me down even more. So I need to get with that one, the white one, the light skinned one, the thin one, the one that everybody wants. That's what I need to check for. Those are who I need to be with, because they will elevate me to a place that I cannot be elevated to on my own regard. Right? It gives them this capital. There's a social capital that comes with it. And then it allows them to be able to compete with men who they might not be able to compete with. Right? All of a sudden, the dark-skinned man is competing with the light-skinned guy, because now he's got the girl that they want. Right? And in Love and Blind, there was that, like, the light-skins were doing the most in the show this episode. What was his name? What was it? Bartiz, the other light-skinned guy? Right? You saw it in the show. It was like, yeah, you be the girl that I go for, Raven. The two light skins would be the ones who naturally, and they said, I'm not saying this, they themselves, these light skinned people buy into this message that they are prettier, they are the one, they are the it ones. Raven and Bartiz should have gotten together, because we are the two light skinned ones, we are the two attractive ones amongst us. That's who we should have been. It's just weird, but they buy into it. We all buy into this, that they are nicer. They really do walk through this world thinking they're nicer than everybody else. And so these dynamics, they still exist even for light-skinned men. Just to be clear, insecurity knows no complexion. Anti-blackness affects all men, it affects all of us. This internalized shame, that does something to men like SK, especially because men like SK are seen as like quote unquote good guys, right? You have the incel type who just will straight up kill women or harass us. And then there's like the covert men who hide the net, right? They hide the not so nice aspects of them, because they know that part of their appeal is that they're nice, right? So like, again, if I'm not seen as desirable, then I have to also perform as like something that they're not, right? A lot of women are looking for that softer, kinder, nice guy. So outwardly, they act like they love women, while inwardly they're just brewing the same sense of hatred, same sense of misogyny. It's still there. But outwardly, we think we're just like, we're plotting them. We're like, oh man, I wish I had that one. Right? SK, we loved him. We all fell for it. Whole time they're scheming on how to humiliate women, that they feel they rejected them or diminished them in some way, right? So comeback usually to them is like cheating on them, humiliating them, especially if they can humiliate the women publicly. Oh, they love it. Oh, they love it. They love it. They love it. They love it. I'll talk about why in a second. But they have to work at being chosen first. So you saw SK really putting in that work to get chose. He was a male pick-me version. Like, he was doing the most to just get her to love him, right? Getting that girl that's out of their league, it reasserts their manhood. To be clear, Raven is not out of SK's league. That's a very anti-black message that says that, like, light-skinned girls are out of dark-skinned guys. That's anti-blackness. If you don't know it, that's called anti-black racism. Black people can also internalize that as well too, right? And so this is the dynamic I'm speaking about. This is exactly what it is. We perceive certain people as elevated and other people as lower. So I'm sure SK at some point thought that he was that guy for getting white girls. I'm sure he thought that especially as an African man, Nigerian man, oh, they love them. They love the white girls. Like, they love them, right? You see who my siblings usually attracted to. Yes, I'm sure it's love and all of that, but there's also this thing that says, I made it. If you get that white girl, you made it. If you get that light-skinned girl, you made it. made it to where you know what I'm talking about. They know what I'm talking about. It's a trophy. You got the prize, right? He was a real winner. He won in begging her. And I'm using this language intentionally to speak to the objectification of women that happens here, because women then become objects. They're no longer a human being. They're just a commodity, this thing to be consumed, this thing to be acquired, this property to be owned. Today, what was that song? What's love got to do with it? Like, that's a lot of men. They don't see love in the conversation. It's transactional. Relationships are a game for a lot of men. Relationships is about social capital. It's about elevating to them, right? Just as if they would invest in stock markets and homes and real estate, who a man picks as his partner is very critical to how he advances in life. It's not always about love. If they could get the baddest, i.e. the white girl, the light skinned girl, the cool dark skinned girl, because there are dark skinned girls that get chosen, right? But usually even those dark skinned women are like thin or beautiful. They have like some sort of like hegemonic, they're pretty, right? If they got the Asian girl, the brown girl, insert whatever exotic trending woman that's in at that time. If these men can get those women that are seen as more desirable, if they got them in the first place, imagine how much more capital they get if they're the ones to leave them. Breaking these types of girls' hearts actually elevates a lot of men. It makes them look cool. Not only did you bag her, but you left her too. You did her dirty. Ooh. Women especially love that. That's weird. You guys are weird. So to disrespect the black women in general is seen as fashionable, right? It's like the most in thing. To hate, people love to see men humiliating black women. But to see a black nerd humiliating like a cool black woman, oh, it's like a sense of vindication for a lot of these men. It's as if justice was served, right? Their inner child, that little boy that got rejected by these girls, it's like, yeah, we showed you. It makes them feel like real men. So this is my hypothesis on why SK stayed. It could be wrong. I tend to be wrong, a lot of misinformation. So take this with a grain of salt, right? But I think this is what was happening. I think he stayed knowing that in the end, he could be the one to walk away. Whatever reason, whether it was because he actually loved her, he knew that staying, he was getting something out of it. Staying made him look good, right? It made him look like the patient and the supportive one. He was the one that was fighting to make it work, despite all of their future obstacles, like his schooling, right? He wanted to love her the Raven way. What a noble cause, right? The audience applauds. Maybe it was real. He very well could be genuine. I'm likely projecting my own experiences on him and to them, so understand that. I will always be the first to admit that projection could be happening here. I'm projecting my own experiences onto them too, so just know that. Things really did turn around after that couples massage. I think had a lot to do with that with the heart chakra oil. Like wherever he bought it from, that oil did it did some good. It did magic. I thought it would last way longer. I thought the heart chakra oil would last way longer than it did. Like they looked like they had possibility. I was rooting for them. I was rooting for them. I wanted them to prove me wrong. I really wanted them to prove me wrong. I wanted so bad to believe in their story because I was hoping that all of these ugly dynamics that I just named, I was hoping it wasn't true. Right? I wanted somebody to be like, you know what, Dorothy, you're a negative pessimist. You're just a dirty bitch that just focuses on the negative. They have real love. They're going to make it where I wanted them to prove me wrong so bad. We wanted to believe in black love. We wanted to believe that the dark-skinned guy really got his love story. You know, like after all those years of rejection, you really got a good one, SK. I really wanted to believe that, like, yeah, that light-skinned girl, like black women, we deserve our good guy. Raven got her good guy. Yikes. I don't know what happened. Well, I think I just explained some of maybe what happened. At the end of the day, it's a show. It's not real. They were both performing. Or rather, I guess there was a level of performativity that comes in any relationship, especially in the initial stages, right? All of us kind of like put our best foot forward in the beginning of relationships, so there is some of that. Apparently, Raven removed all his pics on Instagram, and we've seen what has happened since then. We got the impression it's not going well. They're going through a rough time. I think maybe she left him. They're working through it. I wish the best for them. They didn't get married, I don't think. Did they get married? I don't think they got married. So like it's easier to just leave and to stay gone. I'm wishing her the best. I'm also wishing him the best because you know what? I hope that the both of them find healing. Because there's something I have some choice words for Raven as well too, right? Including her views on Africans. There's some xenophobic stuff that was going on. We don't often talk about divisions within the community and like how Africans view Black Americans some type of way that's negative, that's a very anti-Black. We also don't talk about like how some Black Americans view Africans in a very negative way that's also very anti-Black. All of this is very like rooted in white supremacy that we all buy. There's a lot of like light skin superiority complex happening that Raven also has. Like she really thought she was nice. Maybe it's not because she's light skinned, but I think like light skinned girls don't ever want to talk about being light skinned. They think it's divisive. But like who would want to talk about something that makes them look bad? But I think there's some of that happening too. Her and Bartiz had this light skin superiority complex, like hard. She did him dirty at times, like just like girl, you know, like not. Anyways, that's also like, do you stroke a man's ego just to make him feel good so you don't embarrass him? Like, no, if you don't want to have sex, you don't have to have sex. If you don't want to touch him, you don't have to touch him. You wait until you're ready to make, like, you have your own agency. But I think some of those dynamics happen there. There's some xenophobia, but I'm the xenophobic one. Okay. Anyways, that's all. I think on both ends, all of it was messy. All of it is just like this heterosexual mess that often happens that gets played out in real time. That's all I have to say about Shame and SK. I don't know where that leaves any of us. I'm gonna stay tuned. I haven't, like I said, I haven't watched the third part, so I'm gonna try to watch it and see what happens and how all of this unfolds. But until next time, in solidarity, okay? Bye.